In a context of an increasingly expansionist Russia, the states that neighbour it have a lot to fear. In a context where Russia has never attacked a country that belonged to NATO, joining NATO is the best protection against this potential aggression, not only for Finland but for other states in the region. We bring you 3 points from opening government. Firstly, how you weaken Russia and make the stated aims not only of Finland but of the rest of the European Union and the rest of the liberal states for that matter, how you make their stated incentives more effective. That is, the sanctions that you've placed on Russia, states have already proven that they want to weaken Russia, how that gets better. Secondly, how you strengthen and protect the region against Russian expansionism. We're not only talking about Finland, but we're talking about states that Russia has directly threatened that currently do not count on protection, how we protect them better under our side of the house. Thirdly, the kind of context where we think that Finland also gets protection, like to what extent, even if there may be a risk, they are better protected under our side of the house. So, why do we think that we weaken Russia? As I've pointed out, there are stated incentives and stated intentions of making Russia weaker by all of the sanctions that the US has already placed on it, conditional on A, an improvement of Russia's treatment of its minorities, including LGBT minorities, including a liberalization of the media. Secondly, like Russia's withdrawal of Ukraine, Russia seizing its expansionist intentions abroad. Both of these things cause harm to millions of people. We want those sanctions to be effective. We want to continue to put pressure on Russia to stop those actions that harm a lot of people. What is the problem in the status quo? We say that the sanctions are very well targeted at a lot of elites in Russia to put a lot of pressure on the government to change its actions. The problem, however, is that Russia continues to evade a lot of those sanctions. Firstly, because they seem largely hypocritical, because it continues to have support by countries that belong to the European Union, such as Finland, that continue to heavily trade with Russia despite it, which means that the condemnation value that you get from that is significantly released. More importantly, however, they can directly evade those sanctions by continuing to trade with Finland. They literally still have a gateway to the rest of Europe so that they can invest in oil pipelines, so that the people that most influence the government, that make money from fuel and from trade with Finland in that sense, can continue to make money in that sense. That is why we think it's beneficial if Finland takes one step further back from Russia. We recognize that Russia will probably want to cut trade with it somewhat. We want Finland to stop doing that. We want to condemn Russia's actions, to join NATO, to increase trade with the EU in response. We say that this does 2 things. One, it shows, no thanks Jordan, it shows Russia that it is ally-less. It shows Russia that yes, it is surrounded. Yes, NATO is increasingly stronger. Yes, it does have to change its actions in a diplomatic sense. The problem is that we're already sending the message that it is surrounded, but we're giving it a few exceptions so that it can continue to protect itself and seek to expand to other regions. We say we remove those holes, we threaten Russia more effectively. That means that our influence on Russia increases and our objectives are achieved. But secondly, we directly remove all of the means that Russia has to switch to other markets, to trade with other markets that make the sanctions less effective. We are cutting their gateway to Europe. This is incredibly important. It means that all of the pressure that we currently exert becomes much more effective. The second goal, no thanks, later. The second goal that we want to achieve is strengthening not only Finland, but the region as a whole, and reducing Russian objectives in that area. We point you to the fact that Russia not only borders Finland, but there's also a lot of the Baltic states that have been directly threatened by Russia. All of the excuses that Russia used to be able to invade Ukraine, essentially, where that you had a minority of a Russian population that were not being adequately protected by the law. Not that all of those things also apply to Finland to some extent. They most certainly apply to Baltic states that currently have very little protection. Countries like Estonia that Russia has actively and aggressively threatened in the past. We say that protection for them becomes much better when Finland joins NATO for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it makes it easier for them to join NATO as well without fearing direct retaliatory action from Russia, because they have more protection from the region from other strong powers that are military. That means that NATO can't say, well, yes, you have just joined NATO, and yes, you have been attacked by Russia in response, but you know, all other NATO countries are too far away, or our military spending is going to be really inconvenient for us to move there. That means with Finland there, you're more likely to get that protection. Secondly, even if they don't join NATO, they have direct protection from Finland. Like Finland and Estonia and Latvia are incredibly close, which means that if there is a conflict between Russia and those states, if there is an intervention either through like little green men that are supposedly from those countries but funded by Russia, that means that Finland is like literally next door. They are going to see it, and they're in a far greater capacity to intervene. See, for example, the fact, and no thanks, in a bit. See, for example, the fact that Russia is very likely to have to fly over Finland to be able to like attack those countries in a lot of cases. So NATO protection means that those countries are far more protected, and they are more likely to evade Russian aggression. The last point that I'm going to talk to you about is why we think that we increase protection from Finland. As I've pointed out, a lot of the attacks and threats that Russia has made equally apply to the Finnish population, and we think that it adds not only, like, regardless of whether the threat is realistic, like, we reduce it, but most importantly, we make people feel safer. That in itself is important, that Russia doesn't have the ability to put pressure on people because they're terrified of what might happen, that people can go around their daily lives knowing that they won't be attacked, knowing that they won't have significant sanctions or, like, diplomatic fights pushed on them by Russia because they know that they are defenseless. Before I go on to this point, I'll take Jordan. Go for it.
So you just told us that the Baltic states have very little protection from Russia in the status quo. Note that the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, have already joined NATO. Aren't you just admitting that NATO doesn't provide much additional protection?
As I said at the start, like, no NATO country has ever been attacked by Russia, right? So we think that that signaling effect is important, but we think that it is better when you have, like, other powerful agents that are next to you that have that military spending there already, which means that it's very easy for them to come and protect you. We say that that mechanism is still in place, protection becomes protection becomes much more likely. We say that those countries don't feel safer in the status quo, where literally their neighbour, rather than supporting them, they fear is going to be on the side of Russia with all of the military spending that Finland currently has. So next, what do we think happens in Finland? We recognise that they do have the largest military spending in Europe. Note that no country in Europe has a particularly large military spending anyway. It doesn't guarantee that much protection to it at the moment, right? We say that even that is not enough, and you need even a greater deterrent than that to protect yourself from potential Russian aggression. Firstly, because politically, it's very hard to instigate a conflict and escalate it. So even if Russia were to instigate conflict in Finland, it's politically very difficult for you to actually fight back significantly. So you need to have a very strong deterrent factor so that that never happens. That means that you can't just be stronger than Russia, you have to be overwhelmingly stronger to make sure that they never want to provoke conflict in your country. Secondly, you need diplomatic power. You need to show Russia that you have international support. You need to show Russia that you are not by yourself, that you are not isolated, and that you have support from countries like the US, but literally the entire Western sphere is standing up to protect you. We say that under our side of the House, you have far better protection from aggression that has already happened, even if it's simple violations of airspace. That is things that directly go against sovereignty. Sovereignty is something that we have to protect if we want international relations to be feasible for any country. This is also the case for Finland. Because it is better for Finland, because it is better for the region, because it weakens Russia and furthers like all of the incentives and statements that the European Union and other liberal states have, I'm proud to propose.